Plan, Do, Check, Act. Not an alternative to DMAIC or a Kaizen event, but it does have a critical component to play in your operational excellence. So, let's dive into this thing that is so often misunderstood. Hello, I'm Tom. Welcome to my channel where we make operational excellence practical. And today let's do that by making that famous PDCA circle also very practical. Now, I sort of got this idea of it's the DMAIC cycle, and I was looking at, in my vacation in Paris, at the Eiffel Tower, which back in the days, the Parisians hated it. Some still do, but most now say, oh wow, that is such a masterpiece of engineering. The same sort of happened to Mr. DMAIC, who back in his days was sort of completely misunderstood in America, went over to Japan, and nowadays all over the world we love the things that he put into place, the quality thinking that he left us. And one of the core things is the DMAIC cycle, his very famous Plan, Do, Check, Act. The thing, however, with that it became so famous is that it's also being used left and right. And the main thing I'll sort of do a mini rant on is that I see it being used to structure a problem-solving team or to structure an improvement team. And while Plan, Do, Check, Act by itself is super important as the foundation to process improvement, it's a very poor system or structure to base your team or your project around. In fact, do not use it as a project structure in any type of project, because that's not what it's about. So then you may ask, Tom, what is it about? Well, I will discuss that. PDCA, and as a small side note, quite often nowadays it's also being sort of transcribed as Plan, Do, Control, Adjust, which I think is indeed a very good way of talking about it. Or Toyota sort of likes more the plan. Sorry, it's the standards Do, Check, Act, right? And that hints at much more of how to use it in your operational cycle. So, what are they? The idea is that you plan whatever you are going to do. Okay, so far so good. I'll not go into the details yet so that you still have the opportunity to draw some false conclusions. Then you have to do it. Right? You have to actually execute on whatever you planned, and you check, did I get my expected results? And if yes, maybe you will still adjust a bit for optimization, but especially if you didn't achieve the outcomes that you had expected, will you adjust things to the plan for your next operational cycle, your next project, or your next trials, or whatever you're using it for. So I then see people use it, and let's just take the DMAIC as the example with, right, so define, that's still in planning, because we're sort of defining what we're going to be fixing. So we're planning our project. Then we measure, that basically, it's also part of planning. Right? So we're measuring our problem, we're getting more info on it, more understanding of the process as well. It's before we do any improvements. Then analyze, well, it's still before we do the improvements, because that's the thing, do is going to be the improve. So define, measure, analyze, that's all planning. Then improve, that's the doing. And then control, that's sort of the check phase. We're going to validate what we did and if it had the correct results. Act is, it doesn't show up in the DMAIC. Well, no, act is if the validation showed that it didn't work, then you sort of go back and redo things, so that's the act. I think you can already sense that this isn't a workable system. And even then, the people saying it shows how much attention the DMAIC gives to the planning phase, the thinking about the problem before you do anything. Well, measure twice, cut once. All very good pieces of quotes and one-liners. The ideas are good. Let's not argue too much about that. But it doesn't give you a project structure. No, what it does, and I mean the actual PDCA cycle, is that it discusses how to think about your process. So we plan how we run any process. We make standards. That is your planning. Then we do that process, and of course we try to do it in a good way. So we make sure that we have capable people, the right materials at the right time. This is basically your whole operation, right? This is what happens in daily practice. That is the doing. You also make sure that the doing is well managed, but in the quality improvement scheme of PDCA, there is not too much sort of super special in the do. Well, there's some details, we'll get to that, but this basically is running your processes, getting output from your factory, but also doing that with the correct inputs. Then we check if we got the results we wanted, if things went according to plan, if it used the inputs that we had planned for, and so then do we see anything strange there? Do we see deviations? So basically what we're describing here is the control cycle. We are checking, did everything go according to plan? And especially if not, but that's more a question of priorities, right? If everything went according to plan, you'll pick something that did go according to plan, but you think you can do better. But first, focus on those things that didn't go according to plan, and you act on those. So basically your whole DMAIC is sorta in here. Your problem solving, your improvement teams, in the grander scheme of things, they are that act part. So that's how you look at the PDCA cycle. Now, having said that, let's dive into it and make it a bit more practical. So we are thinking about a process. And as you know, if you've been following my channel, outputs may be the things we measure, but inputs are the things we manage. So your plan has to revolve around those 4 M's, right? You can add the 6 M's if you want, but the idea is you need to make sure that your inputs are in there. And you want to have those come back in this continuous improvement philosophy. So you plan not just what are we going to make, you plan what do we need to know for that. Which competences do I need for my colleagues, for my workforce, the manpower part, right? So what do we need to be able to do? Because we have methods. How do we do things? What set points do we use? What work standards do we use? How do we approach the process? Which materials do we need to make a good product? What are the specifications? How do we need it? How do we store it? Stuff like that. But especially what materials are needed to ensure a good output, and what does the machine sort of have to do, but more importantly for machine is in what condition has the machine to be. So the basic condition of your machinery, it has to be well maintained, it has to be functional, and it doesn't have to be brand new. That's one of the tricks of the machine M. What do you really need? It's a bit like that specification on the material. You don't need to buy the most expensive material. No, you need to know what your process requires. And those are the things that you plan. Then, of course, you do that. And when we are doing our operation, we keep managing those 4 input M's much more than the output. So not are we only interested in the OEE, no, we also make sure that indeed we train our people according to the plan, that we have the materials available, not just on time, but also of the correct quantity and quality, that our machine is inspected and lubricated, and you have your first level maintenance, you also have your serious maintenance, so you make sure your machine stays in correct conditions, and you have your methods that you want to follow. You need to make sure that you're actually setting those temperatures that are needed for your product. That's all the operational, the daily doing of your operation. And then we have that whole cycle of control. And in the cycle of control, if you go back to those videos, you've got your competency management, you've got your process management, you've got your performance management. So you're basically checking all those things. And then we have root cause problem solving, which is already the act part. In the cycle of strategy, we also say, wait, some of my outputs especially, right? So we focus on what do we want to get out of the process, but then we manage it through the inputs. Which processes do we see potentially a good potential to lift it to a higher level. Go into the improvement cycle of improvement. That's also a part of the ACT. That flows forth from the check and act. So your continuous improvement philosophy, the Kaizen events, the DMAICs, the problem solving, the root cause analyses, that is mainly visible in having good checks, good process and performance control, combined with a good system to act on deviations and act on potential improvements. And now we do get back to our PDCA cycle. You see, by the way, that the DMAIC that focuses so much here is even focusing on the wrong part of this cycle, but that's just because it's not a good structure for a project. But in your entire continuous improvement philosophy, to achieve operational excellence, you have to put everything back into those standards. So that is how it all ties together. Whenever you are checking your inputs and outputs, improving stuff by acting on your, what do we act on? Our standards, specifically our 4M standards. Right? So we don't act on the outputs. We do check the outputs, we check also seriously the inputs, and then we get standards. So that is the driving factor of the PDCA cycle. Begin with standards. Without standards, there cannot be improvement, at least not structural improvement. Then make sure that the systems in your daily operation support those standards and are based on them, and make them excellent as well, right? That's a process. Here you will see much of your 5S and AM really focusing on that, but basically the whole system evolves around it, right? You have the standards that you want to implement, so you're doing that, you're getting your results, or not. Then have that control. The control is basically the only one that really goes inputs and outputs, and act on any deviations or improvement opportunities. If this is how you use PDCA, and you are doing it well, then you're cooking with gas. But what are you doing in your organization? Take a good look at it. Make sure that PDCA is not a buzzword in your quality manual. Use it as a philosophy of how to look at your processes, how your inputs generate the output, and how you can drive that continuous, can we do it better? Do we see deviations? Let's solve it. Let's make us more effective and go towards excellence. So I hope that this cleared up that PDCA cycle a bit for you. I see it being used left and right. It's a frustration, but it also can damage your organization. So I hope with this knowledge, you will be armed against all of that basically waste that we see and make your operation more effective. If that did, don't forget to hit that like button. And for now, I wish you the best of luck actually working on plan, do, check and act within your operation and processes. And as always, don't forget to also enjoy the continuous improvement journey.